Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the farm. Today we're talking... No, that's the old introduction. Sorry, I've just undergone a rebrand. That was automatic. I can't remember my new introduction. We'll just make a new one up.
Wing it. Most people just press 30. If it's always the same, I just press skip 30 so I get to the proper bit. So make it a bit different. Keep them on their toes.
Yes. Yep. Hi, and welcome to the farm. We're talking You've Married the Farmer, Now What? Carmen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Can you please introduce yourself, your family, and your farm?
Hi, Katja. Yes, so I'm Carmen Quaid. I live in Tallimba, New South Wales. So we're on a predominantly cropping property, and I'm here with my husband of 20 years and our 5 kids who range from 16 down to 6.
That is a good range.
It is, yeah. Roughly every 2 years. The gaps did get bigger as we sort of got a little bit further into it, and life became a little bit more hectic. So I think we're at our peak now in terms of busyness with the kids, with, weekend activities and sport. And then because of the age spread, there are a number of different schools at the moment. And our eldest is looking to leave home at the end of the year and head off and do an apprenticeship. So that'll be a new adventure as well, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Some great logistics. I'd love to deep dive later in the episode on that, just getting everyone and yourself to and from. But let's start by talking a little bit more about what crops it is that you have on the farm and your role on the farm as well as your business.
So sorry, we've got cropping. So we're winter cropping, wheat, wheat, canola, barley, and some legumes in rotation. And we've also got a small number of sheep, so merinos and crossbred ewes, sort of breeding first and second cross arms. So, but it is, predominantly the cropping. And we're in a sort of probably we wouldn't say marginal, but cropping area, but it is a sort of a drier region, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Carmen, tell me about your business and how that relates to Ultimate Farm Wives being on the farm and part of businesses.
Oh, right. So I've got a side business called AgriFocused, and we're looking at educating people that are working with farms, predominantly on the business side of things. So budgeting, Excel, farm office management, and that sort of thing. So I went into that. I'd been working off farm at CSU, so Charles Sturt University, and working with undergraduate and postgraduate business or ag business students, and that was really great fun. But there was certainly a gap out there for that sort of training for people in farm businesses themselves that were actually working in the industry and were perhaps like I was, 15 or 20 years ago when I just stepped into that role and took on that role within the farm business. And I was really lucky. Like, I'd done agricultural commerce at uni. I'd worked in sort of finance and admin and marketing jobs in the past, and a lot of those skills are readily transferable. But I was working with a lot of people that perhaps had a different background in terms of their education or their previous work experience, and didn't think they had as many transferable skills when it came to the farm, to finance, to marketing, and all of those sorts of things. So I started up AgriFocus just to give people like I was, 15 years before, that opportunity to expand their skills, and the option to do it from home was really, really important, because when I sort of first went into that role, I had a few little kids, everything was so far away, the travel was really difficult, and I just wanted to make things a little bit more flexible. And given the technology that we've got now that we didn't have years ago, it's now sort of possible.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great overview of your business and how that you run that on the side of, the family and the farm. So can you tell me a little bit more about I know every day is different on the farm, but can you tell me a little bit about your, average day role?
Well,
Duties.
when I'm on the days that I'm home, it's sort of pretty much, we've got 2 school buses in the morning. So we've got a high school bus and a primary school bus to meet. So all the kids are with 7:30 bus and an 8:10 bus. And then all the kids are off. And then I try to sort of pack in a, sort of 40-minute pretty hectic housework in the morning, and then start work on whatever it is I'm doing, either the farm sort of thing or the agri-focused by about 9 o'clock, and try and work through until about 3 when the kids get home from school. So that tends to be the focus. And then like all of us, you spend that, you'd like to think you're spending all of that time from 3 o'clock until they go to bed, #present, involved with your children, but I'm normally racing around doing like outside jobs or housework jobs or whatever jobs in amongst the kids being home. And sometimes they're tagging along and sometimes they're just sitting in front of the telly.
Got to do what we've got to do sometimes, and the telly, when we use it like that, is a great option when you are, when they are getting involved and joining you around, the house or the farm or the garden or whatever it is that you're doing in the afternoon to try and fit everything in. How do you have any steps that you use to engage them in those activities?
Look, they've all got sort of set jobs that sort of tend to rotate. So the last, and that's changed. Look, over 16 years of having kids, it just evolves, and you just do different things when kids are different ages. And at the moment, what they're doing is a roster. They've made up a little roster. They've got their jobs that they do. So they sort of, it was funny to watch them negotiate it all, because, feeding the dogs is a big job, but taking the rubbish out is a little job. So how do you make sure that, and then, some older kids are better at other things, and it's more difficult for the 6-year-old to do some of those things. So they sort of worked it out themselves, and they're charging ahead with that at the moment. It won't last, because none of these things ever do. And this is one of the big things that I have learnt, that whatever you're doing, like a sticker chart or a pocket money system or whatever it is, the novelty wears off after about 2 or 3 months, and you have to start something else. You've just got to start a new little thing, because I think, well, perhaps it's just me, but I'm very driven by novelty. So are my children. If it just becomes pretty much par for course, it just say, oh, no, I'm not interested in that anymore. So we'll mix it up again in a few months' time. And as long as everyone's happy and the job's getting done, that's the main thing, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. So very busy days. Do you have a system that you use to make sure that you are hitting those goals between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, whether it's on farm or in the business? Do you have a priority list? Do you sit down and sort of think about what you've got to do and plan it out? Or is it sort of, when the call comes in, I go and do this?
Yeah, look, I try over the weekend just to plan the week out and have a chat with my husband and sit down saying, okay, well, who's doing what have we got on this week, and what school things are on for the kids and what we need to make, and dentist appointments. So we sort of like have a bit of a catch up then, and I sort of try and plan my week out, and I try and dedicate like set days to things. I've found to batch them works so much better than just jumping between 3 or 4 different things. So you just say, okay, well, Monday afternoon, I'm just going to do life admin. I'm going to catch up on all the school notes and put everything in the calendars, and do, if there's something about your health insurance that needs sorting out, we'll do that then and do all of that. And then I've got a day, generally I try and set aside Monday to do the farm stuff and, really knuckle down. That's also our payroll day every fortnight. So I just knuckle down on a Monday and try and get all of that out of the way. And it tends to just be so much easier than having your brain divided between 50 million different things. And then, occasionally you get the call up to shift paddocks or to do something else, or, unexpected kids get sick at school and they've got to be picked up. So, you've got to approach it with a degree of flexibility, but I have found batching things into their area certainly makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm a batcher as well. I'm a batcher, and I like to sit down and work out what's the most important for me to actually achieve today, and I pick one job. Okay, I'm going to get that job done. That's going to make me feel better at the end of the day, and the rest we will go as needed.
Yeah, definitely. And I like writing things down. Like, I really love the tech, but for me, writing things on a list and crossing them off is really satisfying. So I continue to do that, even though I do have some online tools that I use to help me with other things. I do like for the day, set the day out, write down all the things that need to be done. And sometimes they're just micro things, but it's just good to just put them in. And if things go pear-shaped, you can look back and say, well, I did manage to achieve a little bit today. Maybe not everything I'd set out to do, but definitely a little bit has been done.
Yeah, I love putting the micro jobs on a list and crossing them off, because especially, even 5 years ago when I first became a mum on the farm, I was sort of getting to the end of the day and I wasn't feeling like I had contributed as much as I probably could have or should have on the farm. And I was in that sort of mindset. So by writing down the micro jobs, I was like, actually, I've done a lot today.
Yeah. And the other thing I like to do, particularly when I get in that rut of feeling like we're not getting anywhere, is doing one thing that's going to matter in 12 months' time. So, and this is just probably more about that domestic day-to-day stuff, which happens all the time, and just saying, okay, well, look, instead of vacuuming again or instead of cleaning the kitchen again, I'm just going to put some labels on shelves in that cupboard, or I'm just going to do this permanent job in the garden that needs doing, like ripping out a dead tree or whatever, so that in 12 months' time that action actually matters. And perhaps it's just a psychological trick, but it for me, it just feels a little bit more satisfying than doing the same mundane thing over and over again.
Yeah, I do love ticking off an annual task. I have on my calendar a section of like what happens in that month usually, and I do have like seasonal next to some things. And so I'll have like farm list and then a house list and then a garden homesteading list, because I love my orchard and I love my animals and things like that. And usually I'll pick, one of those things or an annual task that pops up on that list as well, because I find that helps so much. You just feel like you are moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that perpetual calendar, that's one of the tools that I use in my Farm Office Plus course I've actually got a calendar that people receive, and it's got 3 sections. There's no dates on it, 3 sections for each month. So you can just subdivide it into spheres of your life, or even spheres of a particular job. So if you're looking at farm administration, you might look at one for rego, one for the finance side of things, and one for some other side of things, just so you can keep on top of that. Because there is a cycle, things do come up time and time again, and it's just about saying, okay, well, this is this month and this is what the priorities have to be. So it's a great tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmen, with your background in, the finance area, moving to the farm, was there any particular hurdles that you found, 20 years ago when you moved to the farm that really resonated with you, that you had wished that someone would have told you more about, or you could have known straight off the bat?
Oh, look, I think some of things you've just got to experience yourself. You've just got to find your own way, and it's just you don't know until you try. And it's that whole thing about like parenting. You're a perfect parent before you have children. There's so much stuff that you assume it might be, but until you're actually in there, you don't really know. And I think probably the only lesson is just to be flexible and just take each day as it comes, or each little season of your life. I think I think that's probably the main thing. Then the other hurdles like mouse plagues and dust storms. And look, you do learn tricks for managing those sorts of things too as you go through. It just becomes, here we go again. It's another mouse plague. This is what we've got to do. And it's sort of ticking off this mental list of all the things that worked last time and the things that aren't worth trying again, and going there. So
yeah. That's what I love journaling. Like we were talking earlier in the episode about writing things down. I do have learnt to keep a journal of those things as well, because sometimes I'll remember what didn't work, but then I'm like, but what did work? So I can go to the journal and have a look.
Oh, look, definitely. And then there's things that happen at certain times of your life. So we had one mouse plague, and the worst one, I think, was not the worst one. It was the worst one because I had a toddler and a baby that wanted to crawl around the floor. So the mouse plague that came 5 or 6 years after that was worse, but it was less of a concern because I had children that thought that emptying mouse traps was a load of fun, and had that as their little job. And one stage we were giving $1 per mouse trap, and that just blew out when we were getting 15 or 20 a day. So that was a bit stupid in retrospect. But yeah, it just, each time you learn something, but the next time it comes around, the things you have to learn are probably different. And it's just being open to that experience and saying, okay, well, things have changed. How do I need to work differently this time around? But definitely, yeah, I haven't done the journal or the diary thing. One thing though, I'm a devil for, and I've really got to change it, is only taking pictures when things look really nice. So whether that's the garden or the house, or like, you've moved some furniture around, you take a little snap and you send it off to your sister, or the garden's just looking perfect in the golden light, so you take some pictures. But you never take pictures when it all died. And I do have a few little pictures of that, and perhaps I've just taken them for different reasons. I've just taken a cute picture of the kids, and then you've looked in the background to see the house is an absolute wreck, or the garden's all dead, or it's just drought and everything's just so red. And you go, wow, like that is just so good to record as well, and so good to look back on, because otherwise you fall in the trap of flicking through your phone or your photo album and thinking everything used to be perfect and now it's shit. And it's, it wasn't always perfect. Sometimes it was shit too. Sometimes things were out of control when you look back and you think maybe they were amazing. Well, they weren't. Like that time, that year, that zone, whatever, was also full of its own little ups and downs and its triumphs and its tragedies. So that's one of the things that, I've just got to take just a few more before shots rather than just the afters.
Absolutely. I during the 2019 drought took photos right towards the end, because I remember so many people saying like it has never been this bad. And so I took some photos, and then 12 months later I went back to those same spot and I took the photos again. So when this episode goes live, during the week that it goes live, I'll put some of those comparison shots, because absolutely, like, we were just in complete survival mode during that drought. And you're right, like, it almost became normal. Like, we got up and did the same feed run and the same water run like every day. And it sort of then kind of was like, oh yeah, well, that's what it was. And then now when you miss some rain, or you miss the second lot of rain, and you think the crops are not going to come up, or they're not going to produce as well as they do, it's nice to go back and have a look at those photos and go, we survived this time. We can survive missing one or two lots of rain.
Oh, look, you said that is so true. And I think even from the financial perspective, when I've looked at investing money in my own business, you're going, well, that canola crop in 2017, I won't tell you how much it lost, but it was a lot. Like, we went backwards by a lot. We got frosted. It was horrendous. And you're thinking, well, how about, look, this little investment couldn't be any worse than the canola in 2017. Let's give it a go, because we got through that. And if this doesn't work out as well as I had planned, it's still going to be okay.
And I think those times definitely helped as well with long-term planning. Like, for this area, we were pretty much in drought for 5 years. So if our business structure can last 5 years without, proper rain and a proper income, then, the business is doing really well. We're set up. And so, when you're looking at your annual turnarounds, or you're like, oh, that crop wasn't quite great, and then the following year it was like, oh, that still wasn't as good as it could have been. You're right. You're still in your 5-year long-term planning.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information, or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's get back into today's episode.
Yeah, definitely. And the tricks to use. So I've done a lot of farm budgeting education, and it was really interesting moving districts. So as I said earlier, like our district, we can get some really, really bad years. And there are further east, more reliable districts where they generally, most years, will get a decent crop off. And it was interesting to see that those people who, within their last 5 or 10 years, had a few drought years, or a few years where there was just marginal or negative returns from their cropping enterprises, seemed to know the tricks a lot more than those people who in their last 5 or 10 years had never had that experience. So they didn't know simple things about talking to the ATO about paying off tax debt. They didn't know the grants that were available and how straightforward it was to apply for some of them. They just didn't know how to talk to their bank and communicate about how they could restructure finance or what could be done. So there were even simple things like, talking to a creditor about perhaps paying a month or 2 months later. They had no scope and no history of ever doing that. So it was interesting to see how those experiences do actually make you a more adaptable or more resilient business manager than having that easy time that we would all love year after year after year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that helps with, whether that's crop diversification or whether that's adding in additional margins into your budget. Do you want to deep dive a little bit more into if you've married your farmer, you've moved to the farm, your background is not finance, what are the first things that we're going to need to do, or what it's going to be most beneficial to learn in what we're talking about, even if they're not doing the books at this stage? What's going to help them ease into the farm a bit easier and be like, it's not the end of the world?
Look, I think you've got to have a really nice line between farm finance and your personal family finance. So you need to have a separate bank account. So not paying personal expenditure out of the farm bank account. So having a separate bank account, which is just for your personal family finances, and have a regular payment going into that. Now, that's not to say that if a big bill comes in and you've got money sitting in your personal account and there's nothing in the farm account, that things don't shift backwards and forwards, or, you have like 3 appliances break down in 1 week and they need to be replaced and that exceeds what you've got in your personal account, that we don't take a little bit more out of the farm. But as a general rule, you've got your set account for your family personal expenditure, and ideally that is enough. So you're not having to scrimp on everything all the time, because that's incredibly soul destroying. Now, there's periods of our life where we have to do it. There's periods of our life where we want to do it because we know that the short-term sacrifice can result in a shorter-term turnaround. So you go, okay, look, we're really going to knuckle down for the next 3 or 4 months because we want to go on this great holiday, and we want to have, and you can do that as a family, and it's great. Look, we're not going to have takeaway tonight because we want to have that money to do these activities. We're on holidays. That's fantastic. But you don't want to make life any more difficult than it has to be for yourself. So I think that's the main thing. I think some families have got some issues around succession and everything, and they fall into this mentality of we can't sort any of that sort of stuff out until we sort out the succession side of things. And that realistically is not true. We can make sure that we're paying ourselves from the business a living wage so that we can have a reasonably comfortable life as a family. And then if the succession stuff takes 5, 6, 10 years to sort out, well, we're not having 5, 6, 10 years we're looking back on saying how horrendous was that. I think that is really, really important, and then probably the one big lesson. And then we can put that to one side and concentrate on the farm finance side of things. And there's some really great resources out there. The GRDC's got a Farming the Business manual, which is applicable both to livestock and to cropping businesses. And it goes into some, great detail about farm finance and how it all works. And it's available free online. And I'd suggest that anyone get themselves a copy of that. We can put a little link there too. So get yourself familiar with things and understand. I think the other thing that's probably a bit of a gap is understanding debt. So in a family where you've got a couple that are probably both working for salary and wages and no farm or no small business, debt is seen as a big dirty thing, and we pay it off as soon as we possibly can. And the less debt you're in, the better off your life is. The reality is that almost all farm businesses will carry debt. The debt will probably never go away. If you have a growth-focused intergenerational farming perspective, and if you can generate enough return to pay the interest on your debt, pay your debt off eventually, and you go again in terms of further expansion or further productivity. And that has been really difficult, I think, for a lot of people that are new to the farming business to get their head around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they look at this monumental debt and they think, how will we, if they can't get it paid off in 5 or 6 years, that realistically they should shut the whole show down and do something else. Now, so we need to understand the debt position of the business. We need to look at equity. So basically the percentage of the farm business or the farmland that you own versus the percentage that is owned by the bank or indebted. But we also need to understand that in conjunction with net assets. So net assets is basically if you sold everything, if you sold the farm, had a clearing sale, paid off all the bills, what you'd be left with. Because that essentially is your exit button. And a lot of farm businesses have got this exit button which say, well, look, if we didn't want to do this anymore at any time, would we have enough to do something else? And if that's a figure that you're comfortable with, then the debt not need be so worrying. And that it can be quite empowering to understand that. As much as I love it, I know that if I had to press the button, we would have a different life, but it would still be a good life.
Yeah. So touching on something else we've briefly spoken about as well is when the farm goes into savings mode, but perhaps, you know, you've moved to the farm, so you're the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law, and the farm's not paying you a wage or something like on a regular basis. What are the other areas and aspects that you can do personally for yourself financially that can set yourself up for comfort as well? Because that's a question I get all the time. Like, am I looking at starting a side hustle? Am I looking at trying to value add to the farm? You know, what are we going to do financially to keep that independence and that personal bank account separate from the farm account?
Yeah, look, that entirely depends on where you're located, what your skills are, how much time is spent mothering, housewifing, driving.
Yes.
And I guess the one message that I would say is don't be so hard on yourself. If you're living an hour or more out of town with 2, 3, 4 little kids, that is your job. And that is okay to just sit in that time and say, look, this is the time where I'm raising children and that has to be a priority. And the farm needs to be able to support me through this stage. Yes, I might have a little side business doing something, but the reality is that the farm should be structured so that you can do that. Now, it's not to say that you don't want to work off farm, but it is so much easier if you're living half an hour from town with good childcare, you've got a profession that pays well and that rewards you so that there's enough at the end and fulfills you as well as pays well. Like, that is an entirely different situation to someone that's in the middle of nowhere and has none of those things. And I think sometimes as women, we put the same expectations on ourselves to work or to provide as men do, or as women who live in a metro location do, or women who have smaller families or less on-farm responsibilities or whatever else it is. So I think always just be realistic about what you're doing. So I had a really good lesson myself in this. I've got this little app called Work Hours, because someone was saying, oh, how much are you full-time at AgriFocus? And I said, no. I could say no with confidence, but I couldn't with any degree of confidence say how many hours I was working. So I got this little app and I set up some little jobs for our farming business, AgriFocus business, some other stuff I do, and driving kids. And then I looked at that over a month, and the thing that I was spending the most hours on was driving kids. And it was just a really good exercise in saying there are only so many hours in the day, Carmen. You can't kill it at all of these other things when you were spending the equivalent of 2.5 working days in the car driving. So a lesson in expectation and a lesson in saying, okay, well, if I am doing that much driving, how do I make that more enjoyable or more efficient or more rewarding?
Yeah, make it fit into those categories for you.
I put a book in the car. So I wasn't scrolling in the downtime waiting. I was actually reading, which too much phone use and most of us doesn't work out to be all that productive. I got a selfie booster for the car so that when I was alone, I could make phone calls, and they were social phone calls. I made a priority to say, okay, I'll keep the work calls to a minimum. I'm just going to make them social, and I'm going to ring my sisters and I'm going to ring my girlfriends and my aunties and whatever else and just have a nice chat so I can get off the get out of the car without a list of 5 extra things to do. You just get out of the car feeling, oh, wasn't that nice? I just had a nice time with my friend. So that was the other thing I did. And then sometimes a little bit of work. So if there was some social media stuff that I had to do for AgriFocused, or some bookwork sort of stuff that I could do easily on my phone, I'd do that. But yeah, I think it was about, the biggest lesson was probably about expectation. Oh, and then making sure that I was spreading the load a little bit more fairly, because I was realising how much it was taking. So just saying to my husband, Anthony, oh, look, could you take kids to footy training this week? Or could you do this little job? Could you drive them here? Or could you fit that in with something else? So that it was just a little bit more of an even share.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that communication. Love being able to ask for help and draw in other people into what we're up to as well, because it can so easily just become, I have got to do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes you forget, oh, yeah, well, they're going to town as well.
Yeah. Or if we have that little Sunday afternoon catch up, you can say, oh, well, look, if you've got to go to town one day this week, why don't you make it that day and take someone in for a haircut or whatever needs to be done. Yeah.
Absolutely. Carmen, if someone is coming from a non-financial background, they're not brilliant with numbers, and they've got to come into the farm business and try and get their head around the difference between what the spreadsheets are saying or what Excel is saying and what's actually happening in the paddocks, because sometimes it doesn't always exactly correlate. What are your tips on that? Like, how do you talk about, do you talk about visualizing something so it makes more sense on the Excel sheet if we're not computer based?
Yeah, well, I would say first get over the whole thing of thinking I'm not good at numbers. You don't have to be good at numbers. So no, everyone remembers at school, you're put on the spot to do some little times table in front of the whole class, and then you clam up, you can't. And then you get this story in your head that you're no good at numbers. You don't have to be good at mental arithmetic to be good at managing the finances of a business. They're two entirely separate things. And if I was put on the spot right now for some times tables on this podcast, I would jam up. I couldn't do it. But can I run a farm business? Yes. It's the technology has made the arithmetic part of it so very simple, and it just keeps getting easier and easier and easier, and will continue to do so. So I think that's get yourself over that block of it not being numbers, not being your thing. I think, yes, ground truthing what you're doing is really, really important. So having a good understanding of the productive side of the business and asking lots of questions and making sure you know how the enterprise works. So if it's livestock, what your numbers are, what your reproduction rates are, how quickly you turn stock over, what the gestation period is, knowing how quickly you can turn that animal into money in the bank. That's a really, really important thing to understand, especially if you've got cattle, because cattle are so long. It is such a long turnover. And I think if anyone is getting themselves out of a drought or destocking mode with cattle, it's a long journey back. So knowing that is incredibly empowering, because it's easy to say, oh, look, it's rain now, everything's going to be right. No, it won't be. It's not going to be right for another 2 years. But who knows what's going to happen until then. So you can make those right decisions. And then I think, yes, doing some numbers that are just on a piece of paper, in an Excel spreadsheet, just modelling a couple of different scenarios is just incredibly valuable. So not overcomplicating things. There's a thing called a partial budget, which just looks at one particular decision. So you might be saying, okay, what happens if we sell these steers now? And what would happen if we decided to keep them for another 3 months and grow them out to this other sort of, carcass weight or whatever? Just looking at that and not complicating it by the fact that the rates have gone up or that the fuel bill's now this much, or just narrowing down to the decision that you're making at that time and what numbers relate to that particular decision. So those little exercises are really, really useful to work through.
Yeah. Do you have something like a template that people can download and use for that, particularly if they're doing it for the first time, or if the farm's in a really busy stage, whether it's harvest or something like that, and they've got to be putting together these numbers for the first time in a busy stage where everyone's communicating on like what's happening on the ground rather than what's happening number wise, do you have something that they can do that, or it's literally just putting a couple titles on a back of an envelope or a piece of paper and just writing it down?
Look, you can certainly do that. And the best message is just to start. So I've got an Excel course that runs through teaching people how to use Excel that's got some of those elements in it. But I'm happy to give a bit of a link to a video for your people cut to if they just want to look at some of that partial budgeting stuff. So they can just access that and have a bit of a think about that sort of thing. But yes, in terms of that whole farm budgeting stuff, that's probably a bigger step altogether. So it might be best just to start off with some of the partial budgeting if it's not something that you've done before, and get a handle on that.
Yeah, one step at a time. We will learn over time. We're in farming for a long period.
Yeah, definitely. And look, you learn a lot. And anyone that sort of comes to me and says, oh, look, I'm no good at this because I used to be a nurse, or I used to work in childcare, or I'm an architect. I say to them, like, were you born an architect? No, you weren't born an architect. You just learnt it. Like everything. You weren't born a nurse. You weren't born knowing how to stick an IV drip into someone. You had to learn it. And probably a couple of times you got it wrong. And then you got it right. And then it became so easy to you. And it's just that same journey. Is you can't expect to be good in anything unless you invest in learning it. And whether you're trying to teach yourself or you're getting somebody to teach you, or whatever way it is, you're just investing in that learning all the time. It's just so important.
Absolutely. Carmen, with your 20 years of experience on the farm and being there, what is some advice you would give to someone who is moving to the farm for the very first time?
Oh, so my husband's aunt said to me when I was a new bride, she said, Carmen, don't learn to drive the tractor. And I think what she was, and I went, oh, that's an interesting one. And it sort of never left me. But I think essentially what she was saying was don't become too good at everything, which is essentially in modern podcast, Insta speak, it's boundaries.
Yeah.
And that was essentially what she was saying, is have some boundaries about what or how much or what you do or what you're prepared to put up with. And that is probably the lesson that I would say to anyone. And it might not be a boundary, and I'm not in any way suggesting don't learn to drive the tractor. And not suggesting don't get a really good handle on everything that happens on your place and be able to step in at any time to do any role. It's just about saying you can't do everything. You shouldn't be expected to do everything. And it's okay to say no. So I had my beautiful stage of life where my kids were, I was baby wearing and cloth napping and preserving plums and baking cakes and on the P&C. And I loved that stage. That was great. Can I do all of that and do what I'm doing now? The answer is no. There's just got to be a boundary there to say that this year we're not having a veggie garden, and that's okay. And this year I'm not participating as heavily in this committee, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So, and, if you need this help on the farm doing these sorts of things, well, then there's only so many hours in the day. So it means that domestically we've got to renegotiate some of those other tasks so that I don't end up a burnt out, frazzled, sick mess.
Absolutely. What are the things that you do, Carmen, for self-care for yourself on the farm to make sure that all those balls that you have got in the air are staying there and that you aren't burning out and you aren't getting sick all the time?
I'm not always that good at it. But I think, and for me, the garden's been a really good thing. And the reason why the emphasis is on flower gardening, not vegetable gardening, is because the deadlines aren't so strict. Like if you don't get your lavender planted on the shortest day of the year, who cares what happens? It doesn't matter. If you don't pop your petunias in this year, it doesn't matter. Whereas with vegetable gardening, there is that sort of time pressure to it. So through the drought, though, that doesn't quite work so well. And it's just not a good hobby to have when the dam goes dry and have that as your only source of outlet. So yeah, look, I do a little bit of online yoga and I really enjoyed that. So I like going for bike rides. And I do like my work. I think that's been particularly rewarding and been a great way of picking up new things that have helped us on the farm, but also to socially connect with other people has been great, particularly when I'm doing the face-to-face courses, but also when I'm doing the Zoom ones as well. It's funny how you can develop those beautiful relationships just as well over Zoom that you can in person. And sometimes after, knowing someone online for a number of years, you meet them and then you're trying to work out whether you actually met before in person or whether you haven't. And often the thing, the thing that makes me realise it is you go, oh, I thought you were taller than that, or I thought you were shorter than that, or because you only ever see people from here to here and everybody looks the same height. I think the social contact's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmen, that comes to the end of my official questions for today. But is there anything else that you wanted to add to the Ultimate Farm Wife community about moving to the farm for the first time and integrating into a family farming business, or even back into a family farming business? Is there a different perspective or something that you wanted to add to the community that you think would help them?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I think it's about knowing that it's going to all work out is probably the important one, and then not perhaps trying to work on tomorrow's problems today. Yeah. And that was something that for a long time, especially with the kids, I was really focused on. So it was always, childcare is just such a struggle. And I think we did just a little bit of everything. We had au pairs here, we had family day, official family daycare, informal family daycare. We had all sorts of things going on from time to time. And it was always thinking about like, oh, that's not going to work because the baby needs 4 feeds a day and I won't be back in time for that. And I'll be, and then by the time that it rolls around and you're back at work, the baby's dropped a feed, so-and-so's doing this instead, this one can put their shoes on, and it seemed to work out. But I was so much in this mindset of, what are we going to do when that goes wrong? Rather than actually just saying, okay, well, today this is a problem. Let's deal with that problem today. Let's deal with tomorrow's problem tomorrow, because we can't fix it yet. And we know that things might have changed. And it's not to say you don't plan and you don't prepare, but it's more about saying, well, where there are so many variables which we can't entirely predict and we don't know the timing of when these things are going to happen, not to get too caught up in anything. So we've got a really little school here. When my little primary school, so we've got 8 kids at the moment. When my son started off, I think we had 25 or 26 kids. At that stage, I thought it was going to close. And I was in my head going, okay, well, next year the school might close. So what will we do then? And which of the schools in town will we send them to? And how am I going to cope with a 7:30 bus in the morning? And this school is still going. Here we are like a decade later and we're still going and the kids are still going there. And, we've had other school changes along the way with different things, but it worked. And there was no use wasting any of that time on tomorrow's problem. And now, we've got low numbers. It may not be here next year. It may go on for another 10 years. I don't know, but I am not falling into that whole thing of making the scenario A, B, C, D, E, F, G for all of the things that might happen in the future. I just know now that if you want to change a child's school, you just walk into the uniform shop and buy some more uniforms and, you tell the school you're changing and you fill in some more forms and it happens in a day and a half. Like, it's not a big deal. So just take those things as they come.
Experience, hindsight, and taking things as they come. That's fantastic, Carmen. Thank you so much for joining us here on the farm. Karcher Williams, the Ultimate Farm Wife, is also a Tupperware consultant. So whether you are looking for food storage containers and options, kitchenware such as microwave cooking, baking trays, knives, tools, and other utensils that you can use in the kitchen, or other lunch and drink options such as bento boxes, travel mugs and flasks, picnic wares and sets, as well as reusable cutlery, or even if you are eco-friendly minded and you want to use microfiber cloths or recycled products, then please click the link below in the show notes and have a look at what is on offer at Tupperware. Tupperware is also always looking for new consultants. If you want to start your side hustle or your business for off-farm income, something for yourself, then please reach out to myself, Katja Williams, the ultimate farm wife, and talk about starting your own Tupperware business or side hustle.